in today's video, I'm going to be talking about 3 separate stories that all link together, in my opinion. And that's a story from the UK about this secret scientific group advising the UK government. Corey's digs focus on the tracking and tracing and these new RFID-enabled syringes that the government has just decided to buy millions of. And I want to look at the whistleblower, this guy, Rick Bright. He's calling himself a whistleblower, much in the same way that doughboy Alexander Vindman called himself a whistleblower from the National Security Council during the impeachment process. Do you remember that? He was a military guy, he had his twin brother. Well, this Rick Bright reminds me a lot of him. So we're going to look at that. This is going to be a meandering video. I apologize, but all I can really do, I think, is sort of expose you, as I've been exposed now, recently, to how many billionaire charities there are, all overlapping, all competing, and all global. So they sell their schemes nationally to national governments, but really in the background they're partnering with the national governments in a big way. So it's a blend now. We're in fascism, global fascism, in my opinion, and I hope to show how it all works through this video. So the first story I want to look at is the whistleblower Rick Bright. This is from May 14th, so just this week. Bright says he was removed last month as director of the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority after resisting efforts to increase access to hydroxychloroquine. And then he goes on to say that COVID-19 could exceed severity of the 1918 flu pandemic, which killed more than 50 million people. So basically, this guy is out in the mainstream media getting lots of coverage. He gave hours-long congressional testimony or something like that. And he's doing the fear-mongering, and he's also saying, woe is me, I got fired without cause. But you notice, he is opposed to hydroxychloroquine as a cure for coronavirus. Why are all these bigwigs opposed to hydroxychloroquine when it is a drug that has been safely used for many, many decades? I argue it's because they all want the vaccines. They've all been working in the background for a long time to get the vaccines, and they won't be able to get the people to accept the vaccines if there is a non-vaccine treatment available. And also, of course, his fear-mongering helps people to call on the government to quickly get a vaccine to keep this stuff under control. So he mentioned that he worked for Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, BARDA, and that is a part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Just note that Bright joined BARDA in 2010, which was the first year of the Decade of Vaccines project. Have you heard of the Decades of Vaccine project? Well, guess who started that? Bill and Melinda Gates. But not just Bill and Melinda Gates. The Leadership Council of the Decade of Vaccines was in 2010 Margaret Chan, Director General of the WHO, so China, Dr. Anthony Fauci, and of course the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as someone from UNICEF and some others as well. Okay, the second story is about the syringes. The U.S. government just contracted with a company called Apiject for these syringes which are enabled with RFID. The idea behind them is the healthcare provider is supposed to tap the seal on a smartphone, which will then record exactly when and where and to whom that syringe was activated, that vaccine was given. There's more to this story, but that's enough for now. Now, that was a project of the Department of Health and Human Services. So Rick Bright would have been one of the people to recommend this company, Apiject, and this system for the vaccines. The third story that I had wanted to talk about that's connected here is who is on the secret scientific group advising the UK government. This group is no longer secret, so we're going to look at some of the members of the list in a second. But the important part about this was the group that was obviously dealing with the coronavirus response, the lockdown, whether or not people should wear masks, what medicines are effective, and all of that. So the head of that scientific group, he was the chief scientific officer of the UK, and his name is Patrick Vallance. In order to show you how all of these things link together, we're going to start by looking at Patrick Vallance and the membership of this formerly secret science advisory group called SAGE. As you can see, Patrick Vallance was on it. Patrick Vallance, during the early stages of the UK coronavirus response, was the one who recommended herd immunity. And herd immunity seems like a good idea. And the UK was kind of out on its own regarding that. But then something happened that changed Patrick Vallance's mind. And they went into lockdown and they started looking at finding a vaccine. All of a sudden. Now, could that be because of another member who was on the secret scientific advisory group, namely Neil Ferguson from the Imperial College? You recall that Neil Ferguson, who released the model which said that millions of Brits would die and this would be the worst pandemic in the world, and that made the government panic and put on lockdown. Well, as I said in my last video, he had to resign in disgrace. It was for, he went over to his lover's house in violation of lockdown orders. That's why they ostensibly fired him. But also they discovered that his models were terrible. They were so wrong. Quote, they were one of the most wrong. We can see that his model was wrong, in fact. Turning back attention to Patrick Vallance, who obviously took the advice given to him on this secret board, we see that before he became the UK's chief medical officer, he was at GlaxoSmithKline. That's a big pharma company, of course. In November 2017, GlaxoSmithKline announced that. They announced that he would be leaving to take up the position of chief scientific advisor to the UK government. What's interesting about the timing of that and the mention of GlaxoSmithKline is that in 2017, at the World Economic Forum, something called CEPI was formed. This is, of course, another vaccine partnership. It's the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation in 2017. And that's the same year Vallance steps down. It's a partnership with his former drug company, as well as 5 other drug companies, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, and 4 countries. Just to confirm, this is a document directly from CEPI, and it's saying that it was launched at Davos, which is World Economic Forum, in 2017. Continuing on, looking at Patrick Vallance, we see he too was a member of the World Economic Forum. Now, here's something that he wrote while he was a member there. Maybe he is still a member there. This is a disruptive new approach to research and development. He wrote this in 2016 when he was president of GlaxoSmithKline. And he wrote it in partnership with the chief science officer for Medicines for Malaria venture, which we will get to more in a second. They're talking about progress made in the battle against malaria. And they say Medicines for Malaria Ventures, a nonprofit organization, took open science a step further. Through the Open Access Malaria Box, MMV provides physical access to a diverse selection of 400 commercially available compounds. Access is free for scientists around the world as long as they agree to make the results of their research public. To date, the Malaria Box has been shared with more than 250 research groups in 30 countries around the world and has led to the initiation of several new drug discovery programs across a range of neglected diseases. So it reminds me of the CRISPR effort, where anybody around the world can get their hands on some serious medical compounds or chemical compounds, and they can just experiment with them as long as they publish their results. But I wonder, who's to say if they're publishing the truth? Who's to say what these are being used for? Who's to say what that research for free has resulted in around the world? Who knows if it's all positive? Moreover, last year, regulators gave the green light to GSK's malaria vaccine. A world first, it is the culmination of 3 decades of research and unprecedented levels of collaboration between GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, the PATH Malaria Vaccine Initiative, and prominent African research centers. PATH, once again, is Bill and Melinda Gates. See the overlap? Why would a company give away its compounds for free? Why would they do that? They risk not being the company that develops the vaccine in the end, and then they've kind of lost their investment. It shows you, in my opinion, that we are not talking about normal corporate operation here, the way we grew up with it. We are talking about global corporate domination. They really are all one because behind them lie these foundations, which is where the real money movement happens. Do you see what I'm saying? This is global. If all of these companies are sharing their wares with one another, you've got to clue in that this is not normal capitalism anymore. They keep mentioning this Medicines for Malaria venture was founded in Geneva, Switzerland in 1999. The board of directors of Medicine for Malaria venture includes people from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, people from the World Health Organization and UNICEF, people from the Global Fund, which is also Bill and Melinda Gates, and even someone from Gilead Sciences. Isn't that interesting? Because Gilead is the company developing remdesivir. I call it remdesivir for my own reasons, which I'll explain in another video, I think. Also, one more member that is interesting here, Elizabeth Linder. She was a senior consulting fellow at Chatham House, and Chatham House is one of the 7 organizations that the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board commissioned to write a report, and the reports would eventually lead to Event 201 pandemic planning exercise. Also, Elizabeth Linder was the former Communications and Public Policy Associate at Google, and YouTube, and Facebook. Interesting. They want to keep the message, right? And what better way than to make sure that their boards are in compliance with the message of the pharma companies and the pharma-based non-governmental organizations. At their 20-year anniversary, Health Policy Watch had an interview with David Reddy, who's the CEO. And he tells us that MMV came out of the forward-thinking people in industry and the World Health Organization, and that MMV was incubated at the TDR. What is that? I looked it up. The TDR is a partnership, UNICEF, UNDP, World Bank, and WHO. So again, same people. You scratch the surface and you find the world government organizations behind all of this. It was behind the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, behind the advent of most of these NGOs, behind the current public health officials in all of our countries. You just look behind everything and you find the World Health Organization and the World Bank. Patrick Vallance has one more interesting connection, and we see in this article here that he is an executive board member for Genome Research Limited, and he stepped down from that as well as his role at GlaxoSmithKline when he became the chief science officer in the UK. Here's a graphic so you can remember why Patrick Vallance is important and what his associations are. But what's the Genome Research Limited? Let's learn more about that. The GRL, Genome Research Limited, was established in 1992 and is wholly owned subsidiary of the Wellcome Trust. And who is the chair? Jeremy Farrar. Now you might not be keeping track, so let me give you a brief overview of just some of the times I have encountered Jeremy Farrar's name in my research. Jeremy Farrar shows up as a funder of the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board. Jeremy Farrar and the Wellcome Trust founded CEPI. Jeremy Farrar also appeared on the coronavirus hostage-taking / pandemic coronavirus pledging event hosted by the EU's Ursula von der Leyen May 5th. He showed up there and he told the world that we need diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines, just like the hostage world leaders did over and over, as if they were reading a script. But this is by far not the extent of Jeremy Farrar and the Wellcome Trust's involvement in the world of vaccines. There's so much more. And Jeremy Farrar, it turns out, is on the formerly secret Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies in the UK. Right there with Patrick Vallance and Neil Ferguson. It seems like a conflict of interest, but that doesn't seem to matter anymore. But that's not all. Jeremy Farrar was also in the World Health Organization's Scientific Advisory Group. I'm not sure how current that document is. When we look at his bio on that same website, we learned that before joining Wellcome Trust, Jeremy was director of the Oxford University Clinical Research Unit in Vietnam. Here's the updated graphic showing even more tentacles of Jeremy Farrar and the Wellcome Trust's influence on this whole vaccine agenda. Who else was on the World Health Organization's Scientific Advisory Board with Jeremy Farrar? Anybody interesting? I'm sure there's lots of interesting people, but one of them in particular caught my eye. And it's Rick Bright. Rick Bright, same guy. Sort of boomy, because they both have the same agenda. And here's Rick Bright's biography on that same World Health Organization Scientific Advisory Board. In 2008, Dr. Bright joined PATH as the scientific director of the Influenza Vaccine Project in the Vaccine Development Global Program and the director of the Influenza Vaccine Capacity Building Project in Vietnam. I wonder. Jeremy Farrar and Rick Bright, disgruntled former HHS employee now calling himself a whistleblower, both worked in Vietnam on a vaccine program. In one case funded by Oxford University, in the other case funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Very curious indeed. Did those two groups work together on anything else? They did. Bill and Melinda Gates and Oxford University offered these short courses, e-learning. They're teaching people to become global public health experts online in short courses. I wonder why. Could it be because they need an army of people who have been indoctrinated into the Gates, Oxford, pro-vaccine way of thinking that they're going to send out into the world? I don't know how long that program's been running for. I don't know how many graduates. I don't know anything about it, but I thought that was an interesting find. So they're linked in many ways. They fund many of the same projects, the Wellcome Trust and the Gates Foundation. But that's just another one. So they're both into training people to be public health experts as well. In online classes, mind you. All right, here's the Vietnam info that I find interesting. From PATH, the Bill and Melinda Gates angle in Vietnam, they're talking about producing seasonal influenza vaccine licensed for production and use as of January 15th, 2019. This is a decades partnership between IVAC, the Institutes of Vaccine and Medical Biologicals in Vietnam, PATH, which is Bill and Melinda Gates, the Ministry of Health in Vietnam, the World Health Organization, of course, and the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, BARDA. Where'd you hear that before? Right here. Gates was partnered then with the U.S. government in this effort in Vietnam. On the second page of that release, it says in 2008, Dr. Bright served as PATH's project director on the Vietnam Influenza Vaccine Capacity Building Project. So this whistleblower, who resisted efforts to increase access to hydroxychloroquine, worked with Bill and Melinda Gates at PATH in Vietnam to develop these seasonal flu vaccines. And then in 2010, he was appointed to BARDA. It looks like this right now. These are all the overlaps. Vietnam, syringes, vaccines, PATH, OCRU, University of Oxford, and Bill and Melinda Gates include both Jeremy Farrar and Rick Bright. And the World Health Organization's Scientific Advisory Board includes both Rick Bright and Jeremy Farrar. And then Jeremy Farrar is on the secret Scientific Advisory Board for the government of the UK, along with Patrick Vallance and Neil Ferguson. Neil Ferguson is the guy that announced that there was going to be hundreds of millions of deaths, possibly. I wonder why he would do that. Could it have anything to do with the $79 million that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation donated to the Imperial College the same month? That might have something to do with it. Obviously, all of this fear-mongering, all of this social conditioning is extremely important to Bill and Melinda Gates, and that's why they are paying people like Rick Bright and Neil Ferguson, not directly, but through this network of NGOs, to go out on TV and scare the hell out of everybody. Because otherwise, how will they get us to accept these RFID-supported injections? How will they even get us to take a flu vaccine? They failed miserably at that in the past. So they have to make a scary flu, and they have to have their spokespeople for it. And here they are here. One thing I'll end with here that isn't directly related at all, but at least it's a piece of good news for you, is that the FDA has halted a Bill Gates coronavirus testing program. This came out on May 15th. The Food and Drug Administration recently clarified its guidance for home-based, self-collected samples to test for COVID-19. We have been notified that a separate federal emergency use authorization is required to return results for self-collected tests, the program said. And here is a New York Times piece on the same thing. They said they did this amid concerns about the reliability of a burgeoning number of coronavirus antibody tests. The FDA responded last week by ordering companies to submit data proving the test's accuracy. So they need this emergency use authorization before they can proceed, and they have to prove to the FDA that the tests work. This is excellent, and this is exactly the type of thing that we need to see happen more often, because we've got to stop these people. They are running their parallel universe, non-capitalist, siphoning off of money game all over the place. I mean, you see it said a burgeoning number of COVID-19 test kits are coming onto the market. Yeah, of course they would. That's how these piranhas work. They get a little chum in the water and they swarm. And who says these are accurate tests, right? We don't know. And the FDA has finally shut them down. Excellent. As we know, the tests are the all-important ingredient for them to be able to go to the next step, which is this contact tracing thing they want to do, where if you test positive for the coronavirus, they somehow feel they have the right to contact you, quiz you, follow your health every day if they want to, and they do say that they intend to follow you and track you, and ask you everywhere you've been and everyone you've been in contact with. Then these contact tracers reach out to those people. So you can see the exponential type growth and tracking control this gives these freaks, and we don't want them to be our babysitters. Shutting down these tests shuts down the number of test results that get sent to the contact tracer. So I'm really happy about that. I'm going to stop talking now. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening. Thanks for all your letters, emails. Thanks to all the new subscribers. It's been really great to have so many more people join the channel and hopefully spread the truth around. Please leave a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you haven't. Find me on BitChute and on Twitter. I'm going to leave links to those in the description box. And finally, if you would like to support my work, I have a paypal.me address, which you can use down below. Or you can write to me at my P.O. Box address, which you can find on my website, amazingpolly.net/contact. Or just go to amazingpolly.net and click the contact tab at the top. Until next time, peace out.